Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Julia Carter's life was shattered when her husband, Henry Thorne, abandoned her while she was pregnant, choosing ambition and a new woman, Renee Felix, over the family they were building. Discarded and penniless, Julia's world was turned upside down, but little did Henry know, the woman he cast aside was a billionaire capable of dismantling his entire empire. From a small apartment and a broken heart, Julia transformed herself into a powerful force, using her family's wealth and influence to take down Henry's career and business with surgical precision. Her quest for revenge became an empire-building mission, and as Henry's life crumbled under the weight of his actions, Julia reclaimed her place as the architect of her future. This is the story of a woman who was once discarded, but rose to unimaginable heights, proving that true strength comes from within, and that revenge is best served as the foundation of an empire. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest stories. The fuel gauge needle of her old Chevy quivered in the red zone, mirroring the emptiness Julia felt inside. The rain slammed against the windshield, distorting the lights of New York City, the place that had swallowed her whole and was now unceremoniously spitting her back out. Just an hour ago, she had a husband, a small apartment she called home, and the fragile hope of the baby growing inside her. Now, all she had left was the haunting echo of Henry's last words. "I can't have a child. It'll hold me back. My future is more important than this, than you." He had chosen ambition. He had chosen another woman, and he had discarded her, pregnant, penniless, and unaware that the woman he had just rejected was a billionaire, capable of buying his future with pocket change. This isn't the story of a woman scorned. It's the story of an empire preparing for war. Life for Julia and Henry Thorne had once been a delicate crystal snow globe, a beautiful, small world they had created together. Their fifth-floor walk-up in a modest neighborhood was small and sometimes noisy, but to Julia, it was perfect. It was the place where Henry, her handsome and ambitious husband, would come home after a long day at his job as a junior associate at Felix & Associates, take off his one good suit, and become simply Henry. He would rub her aching feet after her double shifts at the coffee shop and whisper of a future where their biggest worry would be choosing which European city to vacation in. Julia had met Henry in college. She, an orphan with no family of her own, shared a story that tugged at his heartstrings, and he became her protector. She sacrificed her dreams to support his. Every dollar she earned in tips went into their shared fund, a jar on the kitchen counter filled with crumpled bills and spare change. She believed in him with a fierce loyalty that was absolute. Then, 6 months ago, the first crack in their crystal globe appeared when Henry was assigned a major project directly with Renee Felix, the daughter of the firm's founder. Renee was everything Julia was not, poised, sophisticated, with a lineage steeped in wealth and an aura of superiority that followed her everywhere. Henry started coming home late. The smell of coffee grease on his clothes was replaced by the faint scent of Renee's Chanel No. 5. He spoke less about their future and more about his career. "Renee thinks I have real potential," he said, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "She's introducing me to important people." Julia, ever the supportive wife, smiled and nodded, ignoring the growing knot of unease in her stomach. She convinced herself this was the break they had been waiting for. Then, 2 blue lines on a pregnancy test changed everything. She had planned a special dinner, a small treat with steak and cheap sparkling cider, hoping to surprise him with the news. She imagined his face lighting up with joy as they sat on their old sofa, hands resting on her still flat belly, planning a brighter future with a third member to their family. But when he finally came home, hours after midnight, he didn't even notice the table she had set. He was distracted, agitated, smelling of whiskey and that damn perfume. "Henry, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice trembling with both excitement and nerves. "Not now, Julia," he snapped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I had an incredible night. A damn good night." "I did too." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Renee and her father took me to the Century Club. Can you believe it?" The steak grew cold. The cider went flat. "That's great, honey. But this is important." She took a breath. "Henry, I'm pregnant." The silence was suffocating. The air in their small apartment seemed to thicken around them. Henry's face shifted from surprise to disbelief, and then to something colder, more calculating. He collapsed onto the sofa, his hands clutching his head. He didn't ask if she was okay or if she was happy. His first words were, "God, no. Not now." "What do you mean, not now?" Julia asked, her heart pounding with fear. "This is a good thing." A baby, Henry. Our baby. He looked up at her, and the man she had loved vanished, replaced by a stranger. A man with the calculating eyes of a corporate shark. A baby? He scoffed, as though the words were poison. Julia, do you have any idea what's going on in my life right now? The Felix are talking about making me a junior partner. Partner? She gasped. What about us? He waved a dismissive hand at their small apartment, at their life together. This is a stepping stone, Julia. I thought you understood. A waitress and a baby? That's not the image of a junior partner at Felix and Associates. It's a liability. His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She staggered back, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. So what are you saying? She whispered, already knowing the answer. I'm saying you need to get rid of it, he said coldly. It's the only logical solution. Tears poured down her face, silent and hot. No, I won't. I could never. He stood up, frustration and contempt on his face. Then you're a fool. Renee and I are getting serious. Her father approves. This is my one shot at the life I deserve. I won't let you or that, he gestured at her belly, ruin it for me. The door opened without a knock. Chloe Felix stood there, wrapped in a coat, looking at Julia with utter disdain. Henry, darling, is this sordid? Her voice was soft but venomous. Henry's tone changed instantly, softening. Renee ignored him and stepped inside, her eyes scanning Julia's worn maternity blouse. I see. So the little charity case is trying to trap you. How cliché. She pulled a checkbook from her designer bag. Let's cut the drama. How much to make you disappear and take care of your little problem? A surge of rage overtook Julia, eclipsing her pain. My baby isn't a problem, and my husband isn't for sale. Chloe raised an eyebrow. Oh, darling, I'm afraid he already is. And I paid the asking price. Henry couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, the image of a coward. Get out, Julia said, her voice low and dangerous. Both of you. Get out of my house. Your house? Henry sneered. The lease is in my name, Julia. The job that pays for it is mine. You have nothing. He grabbed his beat-up suitcase and threw it on the floor. You're the one who has to leave. I'll have my lawyer send you the divorce papers. Don't try to contact me. Please, Henry, she pleaded. The fight drained from her. Don't do this. I love you. We're having a baby. He didn't look at her. He simply stood by the door, holding it open as the cold night air rushed in. The life I want is out there, Julia, and it doesn't include you. Chloe smirked, looping her arm through Henry's. Goodbye. Julia, try to have a nice life. The door slammed shut, leaving Julia alone in the middle of the room with the cold, untouched meal, the flat cider, and the shattered remnants of her life. All she had left was the small life growing inside her, and a name she hadn't spoken in 6 years. A name that could buy Henry Thorne and the entire Felix dynasty 1,000 times over. Julia Carter. And her time playing poor was over. As the city lights blurred through her tear-filled eyes, she realized she was no longer the victim of the story. She was about to rewrite it. She had run from that world 6 years earlier, desperate for a normal life, for a love that wasn't a transaction, for an identity that wasn't just the Carter heiress. She had found what she thought was love, and it had turned out to be the most brutal transaction of all. Within an hour, a sleek black car, so out of place in the grimy alley, it looked like a spaceship pulled up beside her. A chauffeur in a black suit opened the door, and Julia, in her cheap, damp clothes, stepped out of one life and into another. The journey back was a blur. She was taken to a private airfield to a Gulfstream that was on standby for her family. Mr. Peterson, in his early 60s, her father's most trusted advisor and the man who had known her since she was a child, was waiting for her on board. He was older, grayer, but his eyes held the same quiet intelligence and kindness she remembered. He didn't pry or ask questions. He simply wrapped her in a cashmere blanket, ordered her a hot meal, and spoke to her in soft tones. Your father never stopped looking for you. Julia, he said quietly as the jet ascended into the clouds, leaving the city of her heartbreak behind. His methods were unorthodox, but he never lost hope. Her father, Mr. Carter, was an industry titan, a ruthless negotiator who saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. He had wanted to merge her life with another powerful family to secure the dynasty. Her refusal, her escape, had been the ultimate act of defiance. When they landed in Geneva, her father wasn't there to meet her. It was a calculated move. She knew it. He was reasserting his power. She was driven to the sprawling Carter estate on the shores of Lake Geneva, a place she hadn't seen since she was 21. The staff lined the great hall, their faces impassive. It was no longer a home. It was a headquarters. She spent the first few weeks in a state of suspended animation, healing physically, but nurturing a cold, growing rage inside. Mr. Peterson became her confidant. She told him everything about Henry. The coffee shop, the lies, the pregnancy, the brutal final betrayal. She left out no detail. Mr. Peterson listened, his expression hardening with every word. When she finished, he looked at her with a steady gaze. "What do you want to do, Julia?" The old Julia would have wanted to hide, to raise her child in quiet obscurity. But that Julia was gone. "I want to learn," she said, her voice clear and strong for the first time in months. "I ran from this world because I didn't understand it. Now I want to control it. I want you to teach me everything my father was going to teach me. Finance, acquisitions, corporate law, strategy, everything." "And the Costas, the Felixes?" Mr. Peterson asked, already knowing the answer. A chilling smile touched Julia's lips. "They're a liability. And the first lesson of Carter Global is that we cut our liabilities, but not quickly. I want them to build their house of cards as high as they can. I want them to feel safe, successful, and powerful. And then I'm going to pull the one card at the bottom and watch it all come crashing down." Her father finally summoned her to his office a month later. The room was intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake and a desk the size of a small car. Mr. Carter sat behind it, a man who radiated power. He was older, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. "You were a fool," he said, his voice grave. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact." "Yes, I was." Julia nodded, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I was a fool to think I could find value in a world that doesn't understand it. I was a fool to trade a birthright for a fantasy." A flicker of something of surprise, of respect, crossed his face. "And now I'm your daughter again," she said. "But I won't be a pawn in your game, Father. I'll be a player. I want my seat at the table. I want control of my own trust fund, and I want access to the best tutors and analysts Carter Global employs. In return, I will make this company more money than you ever dreamed of." For the next 4 years, Julia disappeared from the world. She plunged into a crucible of education. She worked 18-hour days fueled by coffee and a burning desire for vengeance. She learned to dissect a balance sheet with surgical precision, to spot market trends before they happened, to wage corporate warfare with the ruthlessness of a seasoned general. She was no longer just the Aes. She was becoming the Empress. 7 months after her return to Geneva, she gave birth to a healthy son. She named him Noah. He had her eyes and a quiet strength she treasured. As she held him in her arms in the sterile, luxurious hospital suite, looking out at the snow-capped Alps, she made him a silent promise. He wasn't the product of a broken heart. He wasn't a symbol of betrayal. He was the reason. He was the future. He was the sole shareholder of her heart and the motivation for the war she was about to wage. She let 5 years pass. 5 years for Henry to climb his filthy stepping stone. 5 years for him and Renee to become the golden couple of Thessady's financial scene. 5 years for them to forget about the pregnant waitress he'd thrown out in the rain. 5 years was enough time. The statute of limitations on his betrayal was up. It was time to return to the city that had cast her out. Not as Julia Thorne, the broken victim, but as A.M. Carter, the architect of his ruin. Do you think Julia's revenge is justified, or is she going too far? Share your opinion in the comments below. The final confrontation in the gilded cage. 5 years had been very, very good to Henry Thorne. He lived in a sprawling penthouse with panoramic city views. A world away from the 5th-floor walk-up he now recalled with a shiver. His wardrobe consisted of bespoke suits. His wrist sported a PC Felipe, and his garage housed a gleaming black Maserati. He was no longer a junior associate. He was a senior vice president at Felix & Associates. And his engagement to Renee Felix made him the heir apparent to her father's throne. He had become everything he had ever wanted to be. Successful, respected, powerful, and rich. He and Renee were the darlings of the city's society. Their photos regularly graced the society pages. They were the perfect couple, a union of old money and new ambition. The memory of Julia had faded into a boring, inconvenient footnote in the story of his life. Henry had convinced himself he'd done the right thing. The only thing a man with his ambition could have done. He had made a clean break. He had sent the divorce papers to the last address he had for her. A run-down women's shelter she had apparently stayed at for a week before disappearing completely. They came back unopened. He had hired a private investigator for a month, more to appease his own conscience than for any real concern. The investigator found nothing. Julia Thorne, the poor pregnant waitress, had simply vanished. Henry told himself she had probably met someone else, some other simple man for her simple life. He imagined she had had the child and was living somewhere in subsidized housing, a fate he considered both regrettable and deserved. It was a neat, clean story that allowed him to sleep soundly in his 1,000-thread count sheets. He had escaped. He had won. His life was a gilded cage, and he was blissfully unaware of the bars. The first hint of a storm came on a Tuesday morning. It didn't arrive as a thunderclap, but as a whisper in the hallowed halls of Felix and Associates, a major real estate development deal they were financing. The ambitious Project Phoenix had hit a snag. A small, unknown investment firm, Orion Holdings, had quietly bought up the debt of two key subcontractors, effectively giving them leverage over the entire project timeline. Mr. Felix, a man whose temper was as legendary as his fortune, was furious. "Who the hell is Orion Holdings?" he thundered in the boardroom, his voice echoing off the polished mahogany. "Find out who is behind this and make this problem go away. Henry, this project is my legacy." "On it, Mr. Felix," Henry said with his usual smooth confidence, though a tickle of unease ran down his spine. It was a minor problem, an annoyance, but it was sloppy. He put his top analysts on it. The reports that came back were frustratingly vague. Orion Holdings was a shell company, its ownership hidden behind layers of international corporations. But the money, the real capital, seemed to trace back to a single powerful source, a European private equity firm that had been making aggressive and brilliant moves all over the globe. The name was whispered with a mix of awe and fear in financial circles. Carter Capital. The name meant nothing to Henry. It was just another shark in Asia of sharks. He spent a week trying to initiate a dialogue with Orion Holdings, but his calls went unanswered. His emails were ignored. They weren't negotiating, they were just sitting there, a silent, immovable object in the path of his biggest deal. The pressure from Mr. Felix mounted daily. His relationship with Renee, which was based more on mutual ambition than genuine affection, began to show cracks under the strain. "You told my father you had this under control," Renee said one afternoon, her voice sharp as she sipped her Chardonnay. "This little setback is making you look incompetent." "It's not a setback. It's a strategic play by a competitor. I'm handling it," I insisted, loosening his tie. He began to have strange dreams. Dreams of rain and a stalled car, the faint smell of coffee, the accusing eyes of a woman he'd tried so hard to forget. He would wake up in a cold sweat, the luxury of his penthouse feeling like a prison. He dismissed it as stress. A month later, a second blow landed. A reputable financial news outlet ran a story detailing potential environmental regulation violations at the Project Phoenix construction site. It was a minor infraction, something that would normally be handled with a quiet fine. But the story was written with such precision backed by leaked internal memos that it caused a pan nightmare. Felix and Associates stock dropped 7%. Investors got nervous. Henry felt like he was fighting a ghost. These attacks were too precise, too well-timed. Someone wasn't just competing with them. They were trying to dismantle them piece by piece. The source of the leak was impossible to trace. But the journalist who ran the story had recently received a very generous grant from a philanthropic foundation. A foundation whose primary benefactor was, according to public records, the Carter family. Still, the name meant nothing. It was a coincidence. It had to be. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place during a tense meeting with the firm's board. Their primary lender for Project Phoenix, a major bank, was demanding a portion of their loan back due to the project's instability. It was a crushing blow. "Who is behind this?" Mr. Felix demanded, his face purple with rage. "Who is pressuring them?" The firm's head of legal, a man named Peterson, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, it seems that over the last 6 months, Carter Capital has become a significant, albeit silent partner in the bank's global lending division. They have acquired a controlling stake." Henry felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. Carter Capital. The name was no longer just enemy. It was a specter, a phantom hand guiding all of his misfortunes. "I want a meeting," Mr. Felix roared. "I don't care who this Carter is. Get them in a room. We'll make a deal." "Everyone has a price." Peterson palled slightly. "That's the other thing, sir. We've been trying. They've been elusive. But their primary representative in New York has finally agreed to a meeting to discuss the full acquisition of Project Phoenix's distressed assets." "Who is it?" Henry asked, leaning forward. "Who are we meeting?" Peterson looked down at the file in his hands. "The representative is flying in from Geneva tomorrow. All communications have been through her chief of staff. We don't know much, only her name and title." He paused, flipping through a page. "She is the CEO of European operations for the Carter portfolio. Her name is A.M. Carter." The air in the 40th floor boardroom of Felix and Associates was thick with a tension that the state-of-the-art climate control system could not disperse. Henry stood next to Mr. Felix, both men staring at the city skyline, their reflections staring back at them like ghosts. They were in their best suits, corporate armor for a battle they didn't quite understand. Chloe was standing slightly behind them, arms crossed, her expression a mask of nervous irritation. For Henry, the last 24 hours had been a blur of anxiety. The name Carter had become an obsession. He had spent the night frantically searching the internet, finding only polished antiseptic articles about a reclusive and incredibly wealthy European family and their sprawling, impenetrable empire. Carter Global. There were photos of the patriarch Mr. Carter, a man who looked like he could command armies with a single glance. But of A.M. Carter, the CEO of European operations, there was nothing. No photos, no interviews, no social media presence. She was a ghost, a cipher with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. "Remember, we go in strong," Mr. Felix growled, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. "They want Project Phoenix. They can have it, but they're going to pay a premium. This is a negotiation, not a surrender." Henry nodded, but his confidence felt like a hollow shell. He felt like a man preparing to fight a hurricane with a tennis racket. These weren't just competitors. They were apex predators. The attacks on his firm had been too intimate, too precise. It felt personal. At precisely 9:10 a.m., the doors to the boardroom opened. Two figures entered. The first was a man in his 60s with silver hair, an impeccably tailored suit, and an air of quiet authority. Henry recognized him from his research, Mr. Peterson, the legendary right-hand man and chief counsel to Carter himself. The fact that Peterson was here in person sent a jolt of alarm through the room. This was a bigger deal than they had imagined, but it was the person who followed him who made the air freeze. She was tall and elegant, moving with a grace that seemed to hush the air around her. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored navy pantsuit that screamed discreet power and quiet wealth. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek, elegant bun, revealing a face that was both familiar and chillingly new. Her features were the same. The high cheekbones, the full lips, the shape of her eyes, but the softness was gone. The warmth, the vulnerability, the look of a woman who worked double shifts at a coffee shop. It had all been burned away, replaced by a polished, unyielding strength. Her eyes, the same deep brown eyes that used to look at him with such adoration, were now cold, analytical, and completely devoid of recognition. They swept the room over Mr. Felix, over Renee, and finally over him. With the distant interest of a queen inspecting her subjects, Henry's blood ran cold. His heart beat against his ribs. A frantic bird trapped in a cage he had built himself. The smell of rain from a long-forgotten night seemed to fill his nostrils. It couldn't be. It was impossible. "Mr. Felix," Mr. Peterson said, his voice smooth as silk. "Allow me to introduce Ms. A.M. Carter, CEO of our European division." Mr. Felix stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Ms. Carter, it's a pleasure. I am Maldos Mr. Felix, and this is my daughter Chloe and our senior vice president, Henry Thorne." She was Julia. Julia didn't extend her hand. She gave Mr. Felix a brief, almost imperceptible nod. Her gaze lingered on Henry for a fraction of a second longer. A flash of something unreadable in their depths before turning opaque once more. "Mr. Felix," she said. Her voice was the biggest shock of all. It was lower, softer, with the slight clipped accent of someone educated in the finest European schools. The kind, sincere voice that had whispered, "I love you," was gone, replaced by the cold, measured cadence of command. "Let's not waste time on formalities. My flight back to Geneva is this afternoon." The three men stood in stunned silence. Henry felt the floor had dropped out from under him. His mind reeled, trying to connect the dots. The poor orphan, the Carter Empire, the systematic and targeted destruction of his career. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a plan, a meticulously crafted four-year act of revenge. Julia and Mr. Peterson took a seat on the opposite side of the vast table. She placed a slim, leather-bound portfolio in front of her, but she didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew everything. "Project Phoenix is failing," she began. Her tone was flat and factual. "Its financing is unstable. Its construction is stalled by regulatory non-compliance. And its public image is shattered. You are losing money and credibility in droves." Mr. Felix bristled, his face wreathing. "Now you look here, Miss Carter. These are temporary setbacks." "They are not setbacks, Mr. Felix," Julia interrupted, her voice cutting through his bluster like a shard of ice. "They're symptoms of a terminal disease within your firm, a disease of over-leveraging and poor leadership." Her eyes flicked to Henry for a moment. "My firm, through its subsidiary, Orion Holdings, now controls the critical path of your project. The news story that exposed your environmental violations came from data we acquired. The pressure on your lender came from us. Every single one of your setbacks over the last 6 months originated from my desk." The confession was delivered so calmly, so matter-of-factly that it was more devastating than any shouted accusation. It was a declaration of total war. Renee was the first to find her voice sharp and incredulous. "You're admitting to corporate sabotage." Julia turned her head slowly to look at Renee. "I am admitting to a strategic acquisition of a distressed asset, Miss Felix. Your firm was simply too arrogant to see it. You saw an annoyance. I saw an opportunity. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. We are prepared to offer you 30 cents on the dollar for the entire project. That includes the land, the blueprints, and all associated debt. It's a generous offer. It will save your firm from bankruptcy and allow you to walk away with a shred of dignity. 30 cents on the dollar was an insult. It was a predator's offer designed to bait them. That's outrageous. Mr. Felix slammed his hand on the table. Julia didn't flinch. The offer is on the table for 1 hour. After that, it drops to 20 cents, and we will begin foreclosure proceedings on the subcontractor's debt, which will freeze your construction indefinitely and trigger a default on your main loan. The choice is yours. Henry finally found his voice, a choked, raspy sound. Julia. The name hung in the air like a forbidden word. Julia gave him her full attention for the first time. The mask of the CEO slipped for just a second, and in her eyes, he saw a flash of the woman he had destroyed. A flash of immense ancient pain now forged into something unbreakable. I'm sorry, she said, her voice dripping with glacial irony. Do I know you? The denial was more brutal than any admission. She was erasing him, erasing his past, erasing everything. He stared at her, the woman he had thrown out in the rain, now sitting across from him, holding the fate of his entire world in her perfectly manicured hands. He had discarded her because he thought she was a nobody. He had just discovered she was a queen, and she had returned to burn his kingdom to the ground. Did Julia's revenge go too far, or was it the perfect response? Tell us what you think in the comments below. The cost of ambition and the reclaiming of a life. The hour Julia gave them was the longest hour of Henry's life. The boardroom, once a symbol of his power and success, became a pressure cooker of panic and recrimination. The moment Julia and Mr. Peterson left, the facade of unity crumbled. What the hell was that, Henry? Renee said, her face astra. You know her? She used your last name. No, I mean I knew someone named Julia years ago. Henry stammered, his mind a chaotic whirlwind. A long time ago she was a nobody, a waitress. She told Misha was an orphan. It can't be the same person. She didn't look like a nobody to me. Renee shrieked, her voice shrill with panic. She looked like she could buy this whole building with her lunch money. And she has it in for us. For you? What did you do to her? Henry couldn't answer. How could he explain? I left her when she was pregnant and penniless to be with you, Chloe. I threw her out in the rain because I thought she was worthless. The truth was a toxic bomb that would annihilate what was left of his life. The firm's legal and financial team scrambled, running models and making frantic calls. The conclusion was unanimous and grim. Julia's assessment had been brutally accurate. They were trapped. Her moves had been so strategic, so impeccably executed that she had them in a corporate checkmate. To reject her offer meant a swift and public bankruptcy. To accept it meant financial ruin, a humiliating defeat from which Felix and associates would likely never recover. With minutes to spare, a sweaty, defeated Mr. Felix made the call. They accepted the offer. Project Phoenix, his legacy, was sold for scraps. But Julia was just getting started. The acquisition of the project wasn't the end game. It was simply the opening salvo. In the weeks that followed, Henry's world unraveled thread by thread. Julia, operating as the enigmatic A.M. Carter, was an invisible and relentless force. First came the social humiliation. A society gossip columnist, who had once fawned over Henry and Renee, ran an anonymous item about a prominent financial bigwig, who had brutally discarded his pregnant first wife for a life of luxury. The details were just vague enough to avoid a lawsuit, but specific enough that everyone in their circle knew exactly who it was about. Whispers followed Henry and Renee at charity galas and country club dinners. Old friends distanced themselves. Invitations began to dwindle. Next, Julia went after his professional reputation. She didn't just take over Project Phoenix, she transformed it. Within 2 months under her leadership, the project was rebranded as the Meridian. The regulatory issues disappeared. The financing was restructured with an infusion of capital from Carter Global, and construction resumed at a breakneck pace. She issued a press release not just announcing the project's resurgence, but detailing the prior mismanagement and near-catastrophic leadership under Felix and Associates, specifically naming Henry Thorne as the executive who had led it to ruin. He was a pariah in his own office. His colleagues avoided his gaze. The young analysts who once idolized him now looked at him with pity or contempt. Mr. Felix, his mentor and soon-to-be father-in-law, now looked at him with undisguised hatred. He saw Henry not Ash's successor, but as the man who had brought this curse upon his house. The tension in his relationship with Renee became unbearable. Their arguments were frequent and vicious. "This is all your fault," she shrieked at him one night in their silent, opulent penthouse. "What you did to that woman, you brought her back as a monster. She's destroying my father's company. She's destroying my life. Our life, he corrected, his voice desperate. I did it for us. There is no us anymore, Chloe replied, her eyes cold. There is only this disaster you've created. You were supposed to be my partner, an asset. Now you're just a liability. The biggest one I have. The final blow came directly from Julia. She poached his entire high-performance analysis team, not with simple offers of more money, but with the promise of working on innovative global projects, of being a part of the Carter Empire. She offered them a future, something Henry could no longer provide. He was left with a skeleton crew, an impossible workload, and the ghost of his former success. He began to see her everywhere. A flash of a woman with dark hair getting into a black car. The glimpse of a navy pantsuit in a crowded lobby. He became paranoid, tormented. The city that had been his kingdom now felt like his personal hunting ground. He tried to contact her. He sent emails to her corporate address pleading for a meeting. They went unanswered. He tried calling her office only to be politely but firmly blocked by a phalanx of assistants. In one moment of sheer desperation, he even drove to the address of the new project headquarters, the Meridian, hoping to find her. He was stopped at the gate by security and threatened with a restraining order. She had made herself completely inaccessible, a goddess on a mountain, issuing judgments from on high while he was left to wander in the desolate valley of the consequences she had engineered. He was losing his job, his fiancée, his reputation, his sanity. He had taken everything from her 5 years ago, and she was now paying it back with interest. He realized with a growing, nauseating horror that she wasn't just trying to ruin him. She was systematically erasing him from the world he had paid for with her heart. The subpoena arrived on a Friday afternoon. It wasn't a formal invitation, but a simple, stark email from Metro Person's address. Ms. Carter will see you. 400 p.m. The Meridian Building, 50th floor. Come alone. Henry felt a jolt of terror and a strange, desperate relief. The silent war was over. This was the final confrontation. He spent the next 2 hours in a daze. He showered and put on his best suit, although it felt as if he were dressing a corpse. He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger. The confident, ruthless man who had discarded Julia was gone, replaced by a gaunt, broken shell. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his hands trembled slightly. The Meridian Building was a shining testament to Julia's power. It was the old Project Phoenix, reborn as a gleaming glass and steel skyscraper that dominated the city's skyline. It was the tombstone of his career. He was escorted by a silent security guard to a private elevator. The ride to the 50th floor was quiet, ascending through the clouds. The doors opened directly into a vast minimalist office. The west wall was a single pane of glass, offering a stunning godlike view of the city he once thought he owned. Julia wasn't behind the massive empty desk. She stood by the window, her back to him, looking down at the world below. "It's a view, isn't it?" she said, her voice quiet and even without turning. "From up here, everything looks so small, so insignificant." "Julia," he exhaled, his voice barely a whisper. She turned slowly. Today, she was dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored cream-cold dress. She looked serene, powerful, and utterly untouchable. There was no anger on her face, only a deep, chilling stillness. "I asked you not to use that name," she said coldly. "Julia Thorne died 5 years ago in a stalled car in a nameless alley. You killed her. I am Miss Carter. Please," he said, taking a step forward. "We need to talk. What do you want from me?" "Money. I don't have much left, but I'll give you whatever you want. Just make this stop." A small, bitter smile touched her lips. "Money? You think this is about money?" She gestured around the magnificent office. "You have nothing that I could possibly want, Mr. Thorne." She walked to her desk, her movements fluid and deliberate. She didn't sit, but leaned on it, crossing her arms. "For 5 years," she began, her voice a low melodic blade. "You lived in a penthouse built on a lie. You wore suits paid for by my broken heart. You toasted your success with a woman you traded your soul for. You built a kingdom on my ruins. Did you ever think of me? Of course you did." "I don't lie," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "Not anymore. You didn't think of me. You created a convenient narrative where I vanished, a ghost you could safely ignore. Because to truly remember me, to remember what you did, you would have to admit to yourself the kind of man you really are. A coward, an opportunist, and a thief." He flinched as if he had been struck. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. "I loved you, Henry," she continued, and for the first time, a flash of the old Julia. A glimpse of pure pain appeared in her eyes. "I cleaned floors and served greasy food so you could chase your dream, which I thought was our dream. I would have done anything for you. And when I came to you with the most precious news a person can share, the news of our child, you looked at me and saw a liability, a drain on your career. You and that poisonous woman threw me out like garbage." Tears welled in Henry's eyes. He saw it all again. The rain, her pleading face, the finality of the closing door. I was a fool. He choked out. I was ambitious. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're sorry? Julia laughed, a sound devoid of all humor. Being sorry doesn't bring back the nights I spent in a homeless shelter, terrified, pregnant, and alone. Being sorry doesn't erase the fact that you tried to convince me to extinguish my own child's life for your convenience. She pushed off the desk and walked slowly toward him, circling him like a predator. So no, this was never about money. It was about an accounting, a balancing of the books. You took my home, so I took your firm. You destroyed my name, so I destroyed your reputation. You took my future, so I took yours. An eye for an eye, Mr. Thorne. It's the first rule of business, isn't it? He was now openly weeping, shame and regret washing over him in a nauseating wave. What can I do? I'll do anything to make it right. There is nothing you can do, she said, her voice softening but not with pity. It was the softness of finality, because you still don't understand what you truly lost. Cher turned to her desk and picked up a silver-framed photo that had been face down. She turned it over. It was a picture of a little boy, maybe 4 years old, with dark curly hair and Julia's deep brown eyes. He was laughing, sitting on a swing in what looked like a beautiful sun-drenched garden. He was a perfect, beautiful child. This is Noah, she said softly. My son, our son. Henry stared at the photo, and the full weight of his actions crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just a career, a fiancé, or a reputation he had lost. It was this child, this love, a life, a family. He's beautiful, he stammered, reaching out a hand as if to touch the photo. Julia pulled it away sharply. Yes, he is. He's smart, and he's kind, and he's the center of my entire universe. Every move I've made, every company I've acquired, every strategy I've deployed has been to build a world for him, a world you will never be a part of. She looked at him, the powerful, untouchable Miss Carter, and for a fleeting moment, he just saw her as a mother protecting her child. You have been terminated from Felix and Associates. Effective this morning, her voice said once more. All business, Renee Felix has ended her engagement. Your penthouse is a corporate asset and you are expected to vacate by the end of the month. You have nothing left, Henry, I've made sure of it. She turned and placed the photo of her son back on the desk facing her. The accounting is complete. The books are balanced. Now get out of my office. Get out of my building and get out of my life. He stood there, a completely shattered man, stripped of everything. He had discarded her for a kingdom of ambition. And she'd returned not just to reclaim her own, but to show him the true, priceless treasure he had thrown away. Henry staggered out of the Meridian building into the harsh afternoon light, a ghost in a city that no longer knew his name. The world he had so carefully built had been publicly and professionally demolished. The news of his firing was already spreading through the financial world. His phone vibrated incessantly with notifications, emails from HR about his severance, or lack thereof. A tertext from Renee that simply read, "Don't contact me again," and news site alerts detailing the management change at what was left of Felix and Associates. He spent the next few weeks in a state of self-pity and despair. He moved into a cheap rental apartment that smelled of stale cigarettes, a place that was a grim echo of the one he and Julia had once shared. The Maserati was repossessed. The Pate Fipe was sold for a fraction of its value to cover rent. He tried to find work, but Julia's scorched earth campaign had been exhaustive. His name was toxic. The man who once commanded boardrooms couldn't get a call back for a junior analyst position on a rainy Tuesday. In a fit of pathetic desperation, he found himself outside a small, exclusive private school. He knew from a deep dive into society blogs that it was where Noah was enrolled. He just wanted a glimpse, a chance to see the son he had lost. He stood across the street, a pathetic figure in a wrinkled suit as mothers and nannies in immaculate uniforms picked up their children. Then he saw him. Noah bounced down the steps, his small backpack askew, his face lit with a cheerful grin. He was holding hands with Mr. Peterson. The boy chattered nonstop, pointing out a dog on the street, and Mr. Peterson listened with a grandfather's indulgence. They were an image of a happy, normal life, a life Henry had thrown away. As they approached a waiting luxury car, the back door opened and Julia stepped out to greet her son. She knelt down, her powerful CEO persona melting instantly, replaced by the pure, unadulterated love of a mother. She smoothed Noah's hair and hugged him tightly, her face buried in his small shoulder. In that moment, watching them from across the street in the rain, Henry finally understood. Her revenge was never about destroying him. It was about protecting them. Everything she had done, the corporate takedown, the social exile, was to build a fortress around her new life with her son. A fortress so high and so strong that the man who had hurt her could never touch them again. His destruction was simply a necessary defensive measure. He wasn't the target. He was simply an obstacle that had been removed. Defeated, he turned and walked away, finally accepting his own utter irrelicarder. Meanwhile, Julia's life had just begun. With the chapter on the Felixes closed, her focus shifted completely. The cold fire of vengeance that had driven her for 5 years had served its purpose. It was now extinguished, replaced by the warm, steady glow of purpose. She had proved to her father and to the world that she was not just an era, Anais, but a brilliant and capable leader in her own right. She earned not just his respect but his partnership. She established the Noah Foundation, a massive philanthropic effort dedicated to supporting single mothers and providing educational opportunities for underprivileged children. She poured hundreds of millions into it, creating shelters, funding scholarships, and building daycare centers. She used her own painful past as a blueprint to help others build a better future. The girl who once needed a shelter was now building them for thousands. She never remarried. Men were interested, of course. Powerful, wealthy men who were drawn to her intelligence and strength, but her life was full. Her empire was her work, but Noah was her world. Her evenings were not spent at Gallus, but at home in her sprawling Geneva estate or her New York penthouse, doing homework, building elaborate Lego castles, and reading bedtime stories. One night, about a year after her final meeting with Henry, Mr. Peterson found her on the penthouse terrace, looking out at the city lights. Noah was asleep inside. "A letter came for you today," Mr. Peterson said, holding out an envelope. "It's from him." Julia looked at the plain white envelope. Henry's name wasn't in the return address, but she knew. She took it, her fingers steady. For a moment she considered opening it. Maybe it was one last desperate plea. Maybe it was an apology written with the clarity of a broken man. But then she looked at the city lights at the Meridian building shining brightly among them, a monument to her resilience. She thought of her son sleeping peacefully in his bed, safe and loved. She had already written the end of that story. There was nothing left to say without reading it. Julia tore the letter in half, then into quarters, and let the small white pieces of paper flutter from her hand, catching the wind and scattering over the vast, indifferent city below, like the ashes of a life she no longer lived. She had her revenge, but she had found something far more valuable in the process. Peace. She was not the wife who was discarded. She was Julia Carter, the woman who built an empire from the ashes, not for revenge, but for the future. And her reign had just begun. Julia's story is a powerful reminder that our deepest wounds can often become the source of our greatest strength. It's a journey from ultimate betrayal to absolute triumph, proving that true revenge isn't about destroying someone else's life, but about building yours into something magnificent and unbreakable.